In this episode, we speak with Eli Ben-Joseph, co-founder and CEO of Regard, a leading clinical insights platform helping hundreds of hospitals across the country improve patient care by closing the clinical insights gap. The idea for Regard was born when Eli was a graduate student at Stanford, where he and his co-founders Nate Wilson and Thomas Moulia recognized the enormous pressure doctors face and set out to restore the heart of medicine through better data. Today, Regard empowers physicians with smarter decision-making tools that drive better outcomes and boost hospital performance, helping to deliver world-class healthcare at scale. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow.
RJ Lumba is the executive chairman of Market Insight Media and the managing partner of GrowthCap. He is the host of Great Entrepreneurs, a podcast for driven entrepreneurs and business owners. Our podcast covers all topics related to the entrepreneurial journey, from ideation to execution to optimization and to reaping the rewards of a well-run business. In the minutes ahead, we'll share with you unique insights and tactics from some of today's most accomplished and inspiring entrepreneurs.
Eli, great to be with you. Thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, likewise. Nice to meet with you as well.
So you've got a really interesting background, leading up to founding Regard. I'm always curious, to start off the conversation with how you came up with the idea, or how you and your co-founder came up with the idea, and was it based on kind of what you had been working on kind of leading up to the founding of the company?
Yeah, it actually goes back quite a bit. So it really started when I was, pretty young, around being a teenager, is when I started developing a very strong interest in computers and technology. So around age 12, age 13 is when I started learning how to code. I started building PCs in high school. I don't know if you remember back in the day when you get the Sunday paper, they'd be filled with these little leaflets and ads. And I was the kid that would always be looking at the Best Buy and Circuit City ad leaflets and just being in awe of how, at that time, the early 2000s, it felt like every week there was a new upgrade to how much CPU power a computer had or how much RAM it had. And it was just so exciting to see how fast things were progressing. So, very early interest in technology. And, throughout my time in high school, I was really focused in on the computer stuff. And as I was finishing high school and getting ready for college, I got really lucky and was admitted into MIT. And I thought, yeah, obviously I'm going to do computer science. That's what I love, and that's one of the best places in the world to do it. But I ended up not doing computer science there. And the reason is senior year of high school, I needed some cash, I needed a job. And true story, got rejected from Dunkin' Donuts 3 times in a row. And I grew up in the Boston area, so there's Dunkin' Donuts everywhere. Somehow I couldn't get a job there. So I joke that I settled for a software engineering job as my first job. So as an 18-year-old, the summer before college, I'm sitting in a cubicle, staring at a screen, writing code 8 hours a day. And I start thinking to myself, I don't know if I like this. I don't know if I want this to be the rest of my life. So as I started college, I started thinking well, if I don't want to do computer science, what else seems like an interesting career path? One of my grandfathers was a physician, and it seemed like a cool job. He seemed to like his job. So I decided to be pre-med. So that's kind of where the health interest came in. And I didn't know my co-founder yet, but we both had a really similar path where we were both bioengineering students. We both were pre-med. We both took the MCAT, the medical entrance exam, which is one of the biggest hurdles in the process. And then we both independently decided not to go to med school after doing that. And the reason for that was during shadowing of doctors, I found that a lot of doctors were very happy. In fact, my co-founder Nate said that doctors would sit him down and say, do not do this. It is not a great industry. So obviously, when you hear that from people who you're shadowing, it's going to have an impact. So instead of med school, I ended up going to grad school at Stanford. I studied a mix of management and computer science. I realized, I actually love technology. I love startups. And I leaned back into that. And as we finished that, Nate and I kind of met along the way, and we both bonded over this shared experience of almost going to med school, but then not. And we started asking ourselves, why? What happened? And As we dug in, what we found, the reason that so many doctors are frustrated is because they're spending more and more time doing administrative work, more and more time dealing with insurance, dealing with billing, dealing with everything almost but being with patients. And we said, well, how did that happen? That wasn't the case 20 years ago. That wasn't the case when my grandfather was a doctor. One of the big reasons is the electronic medical record has allowed for so much data to be stored, but it wasn't designed to help make clinical workflows more efficient. Doctors, on average, only view about 3% of the data they have access to, which is crazy. So that was the problem we found, and that's how we started on the path to building what we're building.
It would seem that where we are, in speaking of companies and their abilities to produce data and have it readily available, that this particular problem would have been solved of like putting the data in the hands of the doctor or clinician at the moment of meeting with the patient. Doesn't seem like such a hard thing to do, but yet it probably didn't exist, or it did exist, but just it wasn't effective. Did you find that that was the case when you were actively researching who are the competitors or potential competitors?
Exactly. It boggled my mind that when we started the company, it was almost 8 years ago now. Even back then, it was very clear and obvious that AI and data science was going to have an impact in every industry. And you look at ad tech, you look at Google, Facebook, how they use their data. It's like you think about clicking on a link and somehow they figure out that you're interested in something and then you get served an ad. And it's like, why do doctors not have the people who are keeping us alive? Why do they not have access to that same technology? And the main reason it just wasn't built for them. It just hadn't happened. So when we were looking around at other companies, there was almost no one doing this. There were a couple companies that were kind of helping with clinical decision support. There were some companies that were, trying to do chart summarization, but most of them hadn't figured out how to actually make it stick. They seemed to kind of struggle with actually getting adoption on the clinical side. And we thought, well, hey, if we can create a technology that allows doctors to review 100% of the data, that surfaces insights for them in their workflow, and do it in a way that they actually like to use the product, there's something really powerful there.
hmm Now, sometimes when these new ideas come about or the problems identified, different people are noticing the problem and noticing the opportunity. Did you find that to be the case? Were there others like Regard that were starting down this path of building this data solution for physicians?
Not really, to be honest. I think it's a really
Mm.
complicated problem. There are a lot of companies that recognize that there is a problem with physician burnout. And a lot of those companies end up creating AI scribing technology, which now there's about 300 of them out there, because it's a bit of an easier starting point where you don't need to understand the data. You can sit aside next to the medical record. You just have to record a conversation and transcribe it. That has had a lot of benefit to physician efficiency, but it has yet to really leverage the data in the medical record. So we said we believe that that's where a lot of value is going to be and it's going to happen. So we decided to take the difficult path and figure it out. So it did take quite a bit of R&D before we were able to launch, but now it's paying dividends.
I imagine what makes it a bit more difficult is privacy and ensuring that all the patient's records remain secure and confidential. Was that a big part of the problem-solving process?
In the early days, that was definitely a big hurdle. Not only HIPAA and privacy and security, but also how do you even integrate with these medical records? There's a chicken and egg problem where a lot of them wouldn't want to even start working with you unless you had a customer that was saying, I want to use this product. But then a lot of customers wouldn't want to consider using our product if we didn't have an integration with a medical record yet. So it was one of the biggest hurdles that we faced in the early days. And to be honest, what made it work for us is we got really fortunate that we found a medical director at a hospital who was just very, very excited about us and believed that this was the future. And with kind of sheer force of will, was able to push us through all the committees and hoops that we have to hop through to make it happen. So he really helped push us from 0 to 1.
And when you first started onboarding or recruiting doctors to use the solution, was it an immediate aha moment for the doctor? Like, we have never had this before. This is incredible. And then from there, was it rapid uptake?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like, not the very first product that we released because you're never going to get it perfect out of the lab. But once we got the product to a place that it was working the way we wanted it to, a lot of the reactions we get back then and today are, whoa, this is awesome. This is what I thought I'd be getting when everything went digital. Or this is like an AI resident or an AI med student that's always working and never gets tired and makes sure I don't miss anything. Yeah, a lot of our strong adopters have been users of the product for years. They don't churn. They see the value and they continue to use it. And I think for me, one of the most impactful moments in the early days, it was about 3 or 4 months after we launched our first pilot. We were on a call with some of the executives of the health system and some of the doctors who were using the product, a check-in call. And we thought it was just going to be a quick update, like, here's where we're at. We have 2 more months to go. And to our surprise, the VP that was kind of sponsoring just was like, hey, doctor, how do you like it? Is it good? And we're like, oh crap, like we didn't prepare for this. We didn't brief on this. And without us prompting at all, she said, it makes me a better doctor. And
Wow,
I said, that's awesome. Like, that's what we did all this for. That was the goal.
that's awesome. I'm sure you're just a fraction of the overall market size. I mean, this market's huge.
Yes.
And so, can you tell us a little bit about that, the adoption so far, and how far you think you can go?
Yes, like you said, it's still very much early days. It's a huge market. We started by targeting health systems that are on Epic and Cerner, which are the leading medical records in the US. And we're still in the very early days. Like, we're over 80 hospitals now that are live with our product, but there's 5,000 hospitals in the US. And, we're contracted to go to 200 over the next year, year and a half. And momentum keeps building and building. So while, I look back to when we were super excited to have 5 hospitals, getting to 80 feels awesome. But yeah, overall, it's still very much early innings.
I would sense that some of your partners would probably be keen to potentially like acquire you down the road. But what's your vision for the company? Will this remain an independent thing? I mean, it might be too early to tell.
So when we started the company, this was at 2016, 2017. It was kind of the last AI hype cycle when it was all about deep learning. That was the trendy word, not large language models. And back then, even then, like I said, it was so obvious that AI was going to have an impact everywhere. And Nate and I, when having our health interest, we asked ourselves the question, we get really excited about the concept of inevitable futures. Like, what is the future going to look like? It's 2125. What's the world going to look like? And, for example, like, it feels like in 100 years, every car will be electric. That's just kind of the trend, just makes sense. So what just makes sense for healthcare? What is it going to feel like to get healthcare in the future? And what we think at Regard is that the first line of defense in healthcare won't be an urgent care or an emergency room. It will actually be an app on your phone, Regard, hopefully, that's linked to your data, that has access to whatever else you've given it access to, maybe your Apple Watch, whatever other sensors you have on your body, and that you can talk to it. You can ask it questions. You can say, hey, I don't feel great today. What do I do? Let's go get you some labs. You get your labs back, and that it can not only diagnose for you, but also suggest a treatment plan that's customized to your constellation of data that will get you healthiest the fastest. And that's the vision that we have. And we're not saying this is going to replace human doctors. I think that's not the goal here. The goal is they're already overwhelmed. They already don't have enough time. Let's handle that 20, 30% of routine medicine that maybe you don't need to go see a doctor for. Maybe we should save the brains for the more complicated stuff. You just need to get some antibiotics. You should be able to get that without having to go through the whole process of urgent care and med pickup, et cetera, et cetera.
Hmm. It's a bold vision, one that makes a lot of sense. And I could see how it drives you, your co-founder, and probably the rest of your organization. I'm curious, you had talked about like in childhood, you had an early interest in computers, computer science. Did the same go for entrepreneurship? Did you show signs of being an entrepreneur early on?
Yeah, actually, I did. If I think back to it, I actually remember probably in sixth grade or so, my friends and I would, when those like finger skateboards were really in back in the day,
Yeah.
tech decks or whatever. So we made out of paper, kind of molded snowboard versions where you could like put your fingers in and you have a little snowboard that you could play around with. And I was like, oh, this is fun. And then for whatever reason, I decided, what if I like sell this to my classmates? So that was like my first, I guess, entrepreneurial foray was back in sixth grade. And then, yeah, in high school, my friends and I, we realized that, hey, we know how to build PCs, and there's a lot of people who are gaining interest in the gaming world, but they don't know how to customize and build and put together a computer. So we kind of created the first like company I created was called Liquid 3 Computers, and it was three of us who would basically offer services of assembling customized computers, putting cool lights in it, and fan controllers and whatever else you wanted to make it look really decked out. So we actually got really into it for a little bit, and we did have a couple sales, and then our parents actually gathered us and said, "You guys are spending too much time on this and not focusing on school." Who knows what would have happened if they didn't shut it down? But yeah.
Right. Another question I like to ask is what's currently the constraint in your business to scaling, to more rapidly scaling? I mean, you're already scaling at a good rate, but like, is there a constraint where if that was just alleviated, it would open up the floodgates even more?
I think the biggest constraint is that, we're not a scribing company and we're not a documentation. There's two things right now in healthcare that are kind of where the attention is focused. There's ambient scribing technology, and then there's rev cycle stuff. And we're kind of in the middle. We're not fully a scribe. We're not a rev cycle company. We work on the data. So people aren't looking for us yet. So, if I could snap my finger and have everyone just immediately educated on what we do, I think it would be a whole different world. Every time we show a demo of our product, people go, whoa, okay, this is different. And I get it. And we need this.
Hmm.
So it's not something people are seeking. So yeah, kind of if we can educate the market on what we're doing, show them why this is the next step, why this is what the future is, we'd be going crazy in terms of scale.
Hmm. You've raised capital, you've got a great set of investors. Can you tell us a little bit about the dynamic with your investors? We're sometimes interested to know the value that they provide beyond simply the financial capital, thinking that sometimes the capital is a commodity, but really what's different is the people that kind of surround the business. Can you tell us a little bit about how you interact and maybe the value that they provide with your investors?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a great relationship with them all. I have a monthly one-on-one with all of my major investors, just keep them up to date on what's going on and see where they can help. And, in the early days, they were super helpful in making introductions to potential hires that we needed when we didn't really have a name out there, a reputation. Hiring is so important across all stages of a company's growth. And the other thing is one of the most valuable things always, especially from my position as a founder, as a CEO, where there's very few other people who are going through the same things that you are, is just meeting other founders that are a couple steps ahead of you or peers that you can just talk to, that you can realize that you're all kind of going through the same problems that you can learn from. So some of our early investors would do founder conferences or founder meetups where we'd all connect, get to meet each other and share stories. And that's always been valuable. And most recently, we specifically wanted to bring on healthcare focused investors. And our investors over at Oak have been really great at just understanding the space, being able to know who's who, making introductions, making connections. That's again really where the investors can shine.
Excellent. We're coming up on time. I have two final questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
Yeah, I'd say my father's father, so my grandfather, not the one that was a doctor, actually, the other grandfather. He was an incredible story, didn't go to college, but managed to kind of rise the ranks in diplomacy and ended up being at a place where he was, in the room with presidents and world leaders, and his stories are always phenomenal. He's a very gracious, elegant person, and he was always very inspirational to me.
Excellent. Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
Yeah, I'd say anything that supports Alzheimer's and dementia research. Two of my grandparents suffered from that at the end of their lives, and it was, very hard to see them go through that and a very sad thing. And it's something that I hope we can find a cure for soon.
Wonderful. Well, Eli, I want to thank you again for taking the time. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah, likewise. It was great talking with you.